Hello everyone, this is the video you've been waiting for. This is the introductions and the syllabus review. Here's our short outline for the video. So I'm going to talk about myself a little bit, my expectations and teaching style or pedagogy, and the syllabus review. So again, I'm Christy Oxendine. I have a PhD in social and cultural studies of education. I also have a master's degree in education, and I have a master's degree in theology. So I see myself as combining all of those avenues as I teach, research, and write about history of education. So I am a full-time faculty member, and prior to being a faculty, I actually worked with undergraduate students for over 14 years. So I was an academic advisor, I worked in the residence halls, I worked with multicultural programming. So I did a variety of things as a program manager and academic advisor prior to becoming faculty. So this class is based on a graduate class that I teach. And I wanted to say that my classes are generally small. I don't do lecture style. My classes are always seminar style. And I make sure that we always circle up. And so we can all see each other as we're discussing. So again, my classes are usually smaller. We're all looking at each other, not in the backs of their heads, so that we can be engaged in dialogue. So it is important. This is a participatory class, so you will need to read and engage, and the reading's at your own space, and then you can come back to the videos and engage how you would like to. I don't have tests, midterms, or tests in my classes, and I usually have a final project. This one will be a little bit different because I'm adjusting my in-person section to this online section. So there won't be a final project, but we'll talk about some extra credit. I usually don't do extra credit for graduate students. They always ask and joke about it, but I never do extra credit. I also don't do makeup work, I expect things to be turned in on time, and if they're not, I expect that communication. In this class online section, you don't have to worry about that so much. You'll read at your own pace, and then, like I said before, you can come back to the videos. So again, I do teach full-time, and I also research, and I do writing. I'm working on a book. I also do manuscripts and publications, so getting those into journals and things like that. So I am busy in my full-time work, but I'm excited to also share this and adapt a real class that I teach here into a real class into TikTok University, as we call it. So keeping in mind that, again, it is self-paced. I'm not going to do any hand-holding. That's just not my jam. I have taught other areas beyond grad school. I taught first-year seminars, which are like first-year orientation classes for students. And as a theology student, so I got my Master's of Divinity, I also taught in a theology graduate program at a women's prison in Georgia. So I actually taught 3 classes in that program. So I have teaching experience outside of that, but then also workshops, presentations, things like that. So I've been working with students and being in front of students for a long time. And one thing you need to know is that I already think of you all as scholars. There's no, you're going to be a scholar after you graduate, after you take this course. None of that. You're already a scholar. So I want you to think about that. That is one of my expectations, is that you already think of yourself as a scholar. Also, keep it in mind is that everyone is a keeper of knowledge. And this is something from an indigenous ways of knowing. And we'll talk about that more. It's a word that's called epistemology, and it means ways of knowing. And from the indigenous perspective, and I would probably say from other cultures, diverse cultures, we're all keepers of knowledge. We talk about the youth are leaders of the future, the youth are leaders of today, but it's not just indigenous folks that talk about that. So keep it in mind, you're already a keeper of knowledge and you're already a scholar. So I want you to keep those things in mind. Okay, so here is the schedule or the syllabus for the class. I'll give you a moment so you can screenshot. All right, so now I'm going to go through each of them. So as you can see, this first couple weeks, these are introduction. Those are, or the week 2, I already talked about those. So you can go back to my previous video to look at those. Keep it in mind, again, these are good to have in your library, but we're only going to look at a couple chapters, a couple from the first one and one chapter from the second one. And this is because we're building on, before we get to specific U.S. education history, we're going to talk about history big picture, and how our approach to history in the U.S. is from a European and Western way of thinking about knowledge. So we're going to have those intro readings first. Now, week 3, you're actually going to read an article from me, and there's another article that you're going to read about historiography, which means writing about history. Those two I'm going to have in my bio, because I wrote one of these. I can link it in my bio for copyright things. And the second one, I found a copy online, and it's within another book, so I didn't want it to get too confusing. So I will be linking those two. Now we'll go into the other 5 books. Yes, because this is a history class. So there are 5 history books. So our first history book is The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935. And this is from James Anderson, which is a very important figure in history of education. And this book is going to start as Reconstruction is happening, which is the start of Black folks in the United States being able to have schools, or African American, whichever term that you use, having schools in the United States. So this is our first book, and there's 3 weeks of this. Keep it in mind, I have the schedule. I already posted the schedule for you. So let's move to the next book. Okay, so our second book, Education for Extinction, is about Native American boarding schools, and there's a little bit of talk about day schools as well. So this goes into, and this will overlap, when we're looking at years, it'll overlap with our first book. This is the 1995 version, but there is a new version. So either one is going to work. I'm just going to talk in general. I'm not going to necessarily talk about specific pages, just in general about kind of points to pick up from the book. So you could get either copy. Keep it in mind to look at your libraries. Now, one thing to know, as a decolonial historian, as I've looked at U.S. history, or U.S. education history, what I've noticed by and large is it's very much about white education history. So when I look in the documents, when I look in the archives, it's either a lot about white schools or they skip right to desegregation. So part of my teaching practice and research is to, one, critique that and talk against that, but then also to share localized history. So I'm saying all that to say as I talk about our next book. So this next one is Raza Schools. Now, I haven't read this one, so we'll be reading it together. But it sounded very interesting because it comes, as you can see there, West Texas borderland. So this is the 1920s in West Texas. Now, our next book brings us into the 1970s, or 1940 to 1977. So this is our next book as we're moving up into history. And again, Puerto Rican Chicago, because again, we're localizing history and not having, a lot of times history is this black-white binary, and we need to know more about Black history, but we also want to know about other communities, their educational history as well within that context. And one thing I've done with my graduate classes is I've incorporated young adult books, because one, it gives the brain a break with reading. But one thing I learned is that because I didn't start reading young adult books and middle grade books, I loved reading as a middle grade student, and I've always loved reading. But as an adult, I didn't start reading these books until like 3 years ago. And so this is one of the first books I picked up, and this will be our final book. I picked this up in my public library like 3 years ago. And when I read it, I said, this is going to be one of the books I have for my classes. So, and this one is also in Spanish, so keep that in mind. So again, I hope you all are excited. You'll see at the end of the syllabus, there is information about extra credit, to visit a local archive to learn more about educational history, see what documents they have in your library. And this could be in person, but this is also, a lot of places have digital archives now. So you can look and see, like I'm from North Carolina Library, North Carolina Archive. So let me know what questions you have, and I look forward to the rest.